Today we're back with the Allende for a few reasons. I wanted to talk a little bit more about these Pan-American cruisers and the utility that they bring. I think they're going to be a pretty solid line, if a little bit hard to play. I think that these consumables reload is going to be a pretty significant downside to these ships, especially as we get into higher tier. But the other reason I wanted to talk about them is I was a bit wrong in my first video. I made some mistakes where I didn't take into account that this ship will actually be changing with the new update that's released, 12.2. There were some balance changes that were done to it that didn't actually reach the test ship that I ended up playing for you guys in that video. For starters, there is going to be no more spotter plane available outside of the radar slots. That's going to be the major change here, is that the spotter plane and the radar are going to share the same slot, so you have to choose one or the other. So in these games, just imagine that I don't have a spotter plane. So earlier, when I was farming in that previous video with the spotter plane, you're not really going to be able to do that. This game, I really don't have much use for it, so that's going to be a nice thing, because radar is just that much more useful. You don't have any access to a fighter plane, that's going to be totally taken away as well. So one less consumable overall, but really it's the weakest one, so it's not really that big of a change. Something that was changed but did make it over to this test version was the reload. So you're going to notice that our reload is about 7 seconds here as we fire, and that is the official new reload. In some testing earlier on, before I was actually playing the ship at all, it had a 6-second reload, and I was a little confused as to whether or not this change had hit my ship or not. So in the comments of the previous video, I just listed all the potential changes that this ship was going to have after I made that mistake of not addressing that in that video. So this ship is a little different than the one that you will be playing, but as far as I can understand, it really does come down to the fighter and spotter plane consumables being removed or relocated. That's what it seems like to me. There's a few other changes that they've made over the duration of testing this ship when it comes to the rate of decay and acquisition of these combat instructions. You'll notice we gain them pretty quick, but we also can lose our buff here relatively quickly, or at least the progress towards this buff relatively quickly. Not sure exactly if that's going to change or not, but it is a bit difficult to gain this buff all the time. You'd have to consistently be shooting and hitting targets. It's important that it's hits. It's not like any of the super ship buffs where, especially on the battleship side of things, it is just hitting in the area of a ship. The thought someone had in my Twitch chat the other day was that it had to do with it just dealt potential damage to the target, which I think is a pretty interesting theory that might be correct. Of course, you do have to have the enemy ship be spotted on your screen for that to even count anyway, so it's a little bit more complicated than just potential damage at higher tier super ships. But here it's just strictly hits. You just have to hit, and you'll gain this buff to be able to reload your consumables pretty quickly. It's quite nice. Here, as you can see, we're making good use of all of our ship's capabilities, our torpedoes, our plane-based ASWs, which are pretty useful, I gotta say, much more so than the ship-based ones. I really do enjoy ships that have the plane ones, not the ship-based ones. They're so much worse. So it's a really powerful ship in its utility that it can bring to any sort of flank, and this really comes down to, at tier 8, having a heal is very unique. Having 5 super heals is ridiculously unique. And as we go into higher tiers, it might not be quite as unique. So I'm pretty happy with the way this tier 8 is playing, and we're going to have a really amazing game here. Tons of battle impact here, both through our guns, but also through just dealing with destroyers, contesting caps, all of that stuff. It's really nice to have the ship with this much flexibility. I really have enjoyed playing it. But as we go into higher tiers, keep in mind we do have a lot of cruisers with a lot of this utility as well, but without the downside of the longer reloads. So we'll see what happens once we do get our hands on the tier 9 and 10 ships. But for now, the tier 8 seems pretty interesting. And overall, I think if the ships play like this ship does, I think it'll be a cool line. Even though it doesn't have HE like a more traditional light cruiser would have, this armor piercing with improved pan angles is at least pretty good. We do want to be catching broadsides. You'll see the damage drop off pretty dramatically as soon as you're hitting angled ships, which is going to be a downside. Also, these shells don't contain any sort of short fuses, so the shells if you land in the right spot, will full pen DDs like you saw there, but a lot of it is going to overpen, which is severely going to limit our damage into these destroyers. So it's not quite the same as a radar British light cruiser line, for example. It's not quite the same as that, because those ones, of course, have both the improved pen angles and the short fuses, which makes that AP pretty deadly. I'm not sure about the DPM as we get into higher tiers as well. The DPM here is just alright, although the amount of damage we do get up to in this game makes me think it's just alright. We don't have the most DPM, but we still are capable of farming relatively easily. I do pop my buff here, or my combat instructions, and you notice we just used our radar, and it's about to come back up off cooldown. This is a really, really cool side of these ships, where we can have some of our consumables come back almost instantly. We don't quite get the radar back during that combat instructions duration, at 80% cooldown for 30 seconds, but it's close enough that we have our radar back already. And that's definitely going to surprise some people as we get into the earlier stages of these ships being in the game, although people will start to realize what these ships are. It won't be quite as surprising a year or even a few months after these ships do fully release out of early access. I was trying to actually surprise the destroyer with our radar here. We don't obviously have a stealth radar, so not really guaranteed to get a radar detection on this destroyer, so we don't actually end up seeing him at all here. So we'll just push the cap and try and catch up to him. I'm really happy that it's not stealth radar, by the way. I think stealth radar it's just impossible to deal with. At least this way, there is some warning, there's some heads up as to the radar range, and the destroyer can at least play around that a little bit. I don't really like the perfect stealth radar. You're going to get spotted regardless. Brisbane was our recent example of that. Not a huge fan of that. Even though the Brisbane is just an alright ship in my opinion, I think stealth radar is just a little bit too good. We will rush down this destroyer even though we don't have our hydro available to us. We are moving in a way that he can't really get torps off on us because of this island, and we'll take him out. So we finally have control over the sea cap. And just in case you forgot, this is a light cruiser, so we take half our HP for one Kansas salvo, even though we were angled. So it hurts, but the super heals, right? That's going to be the nice thing, is the ability to tank some damage and then actually be able to come back and fight in the late games. That's why heals are just so valuable on cruisers. It's one of my favorite things about higher tier cruisers. Don't really enjoy the mid tiers as much because every little mistake is just so much more punishing when you don't have a heal. This extra little bit of spotting I'm going to get here won't be possible with the release ship, so this is the one time I guess I'm using my spotter plane here, and I'm really not going to get much out of it. I think the only thing potentially is that this Lexington we can do some damage to, although even then I think we would have range regardless to hit this guy, so it's not a big deal. And then I will end up using it for just one other, just ability to shoot a little bit more over an island, or at least see over an island, get that spotter plane view by pushing C, I want to say it is. Whenever you have a spotter plane up, you click C, you can alternate between the spotter plane view and then your normal ship's view. The torps have been pretty useful in these closer range scenarios. Of course, we don't have stealth torps on these ships, so it is a little more difficult to get some value out of these torps, but it's nice if you are pushing in aggressively and people do try and come around corners after you. I'm trying to use island cover as best as I can here. Definitely keep an eye out for a lot of islands to use with these lines and any other really light cruiser lines. I'm always looking for opportunities like this to prevent the enemy ships from shooting me while I'm able to shoot back at them. It doesn't even have to be a perfectly low island that you can shoot over. Even this tall cliff to the left is really going to help me. As I continue to slowly move left around this cliff, and the enemy battleships are moving to the right, you can see how I'm still able to shoot them, and they wouldn't be able to shoot me back, especially if I notice their guns turning towards me. I could just accelerate and get out of their line of fire. So it really is a lot about island usage when it comes to light cruisers. You have to be learning which islands can work and how to even use some suboptimal islands like this one. The game here, though, is relatively wrapped up. As you can see, 142,000 damage. Feels pretty good coming out of a AP-only light cruiser that At least I was expecting to be more utility focused than damage focused. I was really not expecting to have a game this good in it, but I'm pretty happy I did. It makes me a little bit more excited for this new line. For whatever reason, I was never really all that excited about the Japanese light cruiser line. I still haven't made a video on the Yodo. I fully am aware of that. I'm sorry, guys. I just have not had a very interesting game in it yet that I want to talk about. They've all just been pretty boring and subpar. I'll try and work on that next week. We'll see if we can get into that a little bit more. I feel like I should get something out, but for now, these new light cruisers are much, much more interesting to me. And the AP does decent damage into the upper belts here, and even a little bit into the superstructure of some of these battleships. So it's not all bad that we don't have HE on this line. Of course, I would prefer to have HE. It's really nice to use that to farm battleships, fires being a very, very powerful tool to burn battleships down and get them out. But the AP is doing enough to even annoy this key to blind fire at us. Of course, this island is more preferable to the last one. Island usage really is the key to light cruisers, in my opinion. It's very, very powerful ships, but of course they can die relatively quickly as well. So to me, this line is pretty interesting. You guys will have to let me know what you think in the comments down below. The captain build is still the exact same as what I was using on the previous video. It's still a pretty basic commander, but given the amount of utility we have, really all we want to do is maximize our concealment and then get some more value out of these consumables. That's really what it comes down to. At higher tier, of course, I'll probably focus a little bit more on BPM. But 170k damage is a pretty good experience in a tier 8 light cruiser. So it's nice to know that it can do some damage, although at higher tiers, we won't be quite as special with all of our utility and all these consumables. So that will be the potential issue as we go up the line, where the tier 8 feels special because of all this utility, especially the healing that we get here. Higher tiers, we do have to also do some pretty massive damage output on top of our utility. So there we go, 182 even in this game, feels pretty good. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and have a great rest of your day.